Khalid, if you're recording, or would you like to record? Okay. So, Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. This session is being recorded and live streamed. Today, I'm very excited that our guest is a very youthful, young, energetic, and at the same time experienced entrepreneur. And he will be talking about challenges and opportunities of angel investing in Pakistan. First, he will, of course, tell us what is an angel investment. So basics ke saath, and then, so basically Salman is a seasoned emerging market merger and acquisition and private equity and venture capital specialist. With several years in senior leadership roles, Salman is currently the sector lead for consumer, retail, healthcare, and related tech vertical for BNP Paribas for the Middle East and Africa. And he's Dubai-based. During his career, Salman has worked across the entire financial modeling, deal structuring, and documentation and post-acquisition management and exit, with significant transaction experience in MEA region, which is Middle East and Africa. Some people call it MENA region as well, and Turkey, Pakistan, Malaysia, across a variety of sectors. Prior to BNP Paribas, Salman worked for 3i-backed Manara Equity Partners and EMP Global in Bahrain and Washington, DC. Salman has been actively involved in developing Pakistan's startup ecosystem as a partner in Paklaunch.com, founder of an angel syndicate called Chogori Ventures.com, members of Foundation Council of NIC Lahore, housed in Lums, board member of Open MENA, advisory MPP for Georgetown University, Fulbright Scholar, as well as MBA from Lahore University of Management Sciences, Dean's List. He holds an undergraduate degree, first class, in electrical engineering from UET Lahore. So as you can see, I struggled with a lot of these, the acronym and degrees, as well as the region, because we are used to more medical in APPNA MERIT terminology. But this year and previous year, we decided to learn more about another side where physician can contribute a lot, because physicians are end users, and we know how things work, how medicine affects the patient, touches the patient, how medical devices and other IT solutions touches healthcare system. So our contribution is very valuable, but traditionally physicians have been so busy in their day-to-day patient care, clinical care, morning to evening, that they did not have time. But I think more and more physicians are interested interested in learning, and whether how far they will go, it has to be seen. But a group of physicians in APPNA MERIT and APPNA has come together and see, and probably next weekend there will be introduction of Tajdeed in this webinar series, so that we can also learn what is it. So we are at the back end or front end, whatever you want to choose, but what is going on in the other world? Where do these medical devices come from? Where do these IT solutions come from? Where do these pharmaceutical solutions come from? So I think it's very exciting, and we had a lot of traction last year and this year in our webinars, which speaks volume to this. So APPNA MERIT, as you know, is a group or committee of APPNA, which was launched in 2007 and has been running. And successfully. But like I said, in these past 2 years, we had shifted towards entrepreneurship in healthcare industry. And I'm the co-chair. Danish Bhatti is the chair this year, and most of us are member of APPNA MERIT. With that, I will invite Salman to begin his presentation. Hopefully, next 35, maximum 40 minutes, so that we have enough time for question and answer. And we have illustrious panelists, which I would introduce later after the presentation. Salman, please go ahead.
Sure. I think thank you first of all for the invitation, Dr. Shahid and Dr. Danish. I had the pleasure of interacting with a few of you in the last couple of months, and I would say it's a two-way process always. And I think the medical community is not alone in terms of being in a silo. I think it's generally something you see across a number of fields. And you sort of, there's a lot of thought in breeding, but often the synergies and the innovations come out of cross sector pollination, right? So I think that the way I was sort of thinking about today's, I would say more of an interactive session rather than me sort of lecturing. I think you about the sector in the space. Some of you may have some sense of angel investing and may have contributed towards angel investing and done some angel investing in the past. Others may not. So I think as the topic goes, essentially, it's about the opportunities and the challenges of angel investing in Pakistan in particular. And I guess some of them are general to all angel investing. Some of them are specific to investing in Pakistan. So the way I would sort of maybe walk you through my own journey, and maybe that sort of helps put some context around how I think about angel investing and what I have learned over the last, I would say, 2-3 years. So I come from I would say, technology background to the extent that I'm an engineer, but I never really did much work as in engineering itself. I pretty much went into finance and banking immediately with my MBA and so on and so forth. And essentially started my career in private equity in DC back in 2006 after Georgetown. And most of my career between, I would say, 2007 to 2000, I would say almost 18, I spent bulk of my time doing either private equity investments or mergers and acquisitions and typically large investments, which would be hundreds of millions of dollars in size. Typically, they would be companies which would be quite profitable, cash flow generative, with some growth inside them. And that's where I spent most of my time managing investments or investing either in Middle East, in Pakistan, in Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia, Africa, over the last, I would say, 16, 17 years. What brought me to, and by the way, feel free to interject, ask questions as I go along. So I'm completely open to queries coming in while I'm presenting, and we can have it more interactive as we go. The reason I sort of start about thinking about angel investing or venture capital was essentially because I was always curious about how investing was done in early stage companies. When you're doing actually private equity investments, typically you are looking at companies which are already generally profitable, already have a certain size, will have a management team which typically know what they're doing. They already have a business model which works. They have a market positioning in a market which generally you understand. There is not a lot of reinventing the wheel in terms of what you're trying to do. It's more about being the best in that market to make money. And that was my experience from 2007-6 to almost 2018, more or less, I would say, looking at these large, healthy, cash flow generative businesses where I did transactions all the way to $100 million to 10, 12, $15 billion in size. And as an investment banker or a private equity professional, you tend to feel doing these very large transactions that you know what you're doing exactly. But as I sort of started dabbling more and more, I would say 2018, 19, and 20 in the venture space, what happened essentially is that, and I would say primarily from 19 onwards, I started looking more in the venture space. And the interest which I had in venture space was because I actually thought that maybe I have all this experience, doing these very large transactions with large profitable companies. Perhaps I can help some of these small upcoming ventures in Pakistan and other emerging markets with my background, and help these companies and the young founders grow. Lo and behold, what I sort of realized very quickly is that it's a different ball game altogether. And the reason I say it is because typically the problems a young company has are quite different from problems that generally a large, established, profitable company runs into. So while I had spent 10, 15 years of my life looking at, talking to Fortune 500 CEOs and doing large multi-billion dollar transactions, all of a sudden I felt I was a bit out of my depth. Because early on, the challenge you face, and it's not particular to Pakistan, is, and especially in tech-driven ventures, is the business model itself is evolving. The product market fit is not yet established. The founders have not run this business for a long time. They don't have internal controls. They don't have a large team to work with them. They don't have a lot of money to spend on what they're trying to achieve. Often they are assuming that something which has worked in other markets and other countries would work in their market, but there is no proof in the pudding. And while you're doing a large transaction with a high, a large company, typically you will spend a lot of time doing due diligence on the company, its financials, its founders, operations, legal structure. Here, often, a lot of times you would be dealing with founders who have actually not even established a legal entity. So you might be actually the first one helping them establish a legal entity. They may not have actually any financial records to speak of, or very little. And even if they do have financial records, the company and its history is so short that it's difficult to actually make any head or tail out of those financial records or the operations. So, and that was something new for me while analyzing and trying to figure out, first of all, is this a company or a business worth spending my time and my money on? And number two, how do I actually value such a company? How do I figure out how do I do my due diligence on such a company? How do I make a decision on what to invest, how much to invest, at what terms to invest, and which founders are worth backing and which are not? This was a bit new, even for someone of my background who had spent, I would say, more than a decade doing similar business, but at a bigger scale. But this is not abnormal. At the end of the day, what you figure out very quickly is that there are a couple of things which drive success in the venture space, and that include understanding the tenacity of the founder and the founders and their acumen, how hungry they are, how good is their business model. Is that something which has been proven in other markets or not? Can they actually grow and scale up and become big if they do it right? And is there a path to profitability at some point? I think those are typically the kind of things you start looking at in the absence of hard numbers, in the absence of hard operational data, often when you go in early in investing in these companies. So those were sort of initial learnings which came out from
the expectations, Salman. So this is a large physician group, and there's like people who come to me and advise me on what to do stuff after doing this for about 3-4 years now. And there are people who just doesn't understand the word venture capital, right? I mean, they don't really. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands the tone of what we're trying to do here. So what Salman represents is basically how to bring outside investment in terms of from any diaspora. Pakistani diaspora is mainly where the investment is coming from. It could be UK, Australia, USA, etc., to basically help fund new ventures in Pakistan. So that's one of the questions, the QA that was asking out. So that's one of the things that we with Tajdeed and APPNA are constantly looking at to actually support founders with funding so they can bring their products, ideas to life. Now, all of you have investment period, experience. I mean, you have definitely a 401k. Some people have rental properties, own gas stations, practices. This is a very different investment opportunity and a very different operationalizing in terms of investment itself. It's highly risky, and we are not recommending from an APPNA forum to go ahead and do venture capital investment on your own behalf. So that's a disclosure. This is just an education session. And then secondly, we wanted to highlight Salman, who has done this work, mashallah, for so many years and has done some great work into it. So when you are talking about venture, basically the word venture itself is like, for example, I have a venture and I need capital. So venture capitalism. And then so somebody can give me the capital so that my venture can stand up. And then there's phases to it, all the way from angel investment, which is very, very early, then pre-seed, then seed, and then series A. And then most people are looking for the early stage investments because that's where you're looking at approximately 100x return. And then fortunately, that is where 90% failure rate lies. And then as you move along, the investment change all the way to, publicly traded stock markets, which you all have invested in. So we are talking about literally very early, like when Amazon was started, who actually invested in Amazon the first day, or who invested in Google, and those who invested at the pre-seed level, at the idea level, they're basically billionaires right now. And as we all know, that Microsoft has created more millionaires in the world as compared to any other company. So that's sort of the scope of the talk here. Now, what we want to do, as far as, especially thanks to Salman coming on this, is how we can replicate this process, how we can do the networking so that Pakistan can benefit from this, especially as he just told us that we used to have, and unfortunately, that's going to be one of my questions, that in the very sort of capital rich environment, and we are shifting gears on that. So again, I just wanted to set the little bit of tone. So those who have questions, please put that in the QA, and I'll let Shahid Bhai and continue with the new first questions.
I would actually introduce the panelists here. So Junaid, as you know, is tech in healthcare and clinical and many innovative ideas. He's bubbling and burning with them, and mashallah have a very good sound head on his shoulder. So you met. He's also a neurologist by profession, and actually a vascular neurologist like me. And Danish is a neurologist, but movement disorder specialist. So Umar is our panelist who is actually a pharmaceutical scientist and based in Silicon Valley, and have wealth of experience in this kind of world. So Umar, please go ahead and further introduce yourself, and any question for Salman, and in general. I think I like this session because it's more interactive, and we would like to be more interactive, and audience also, I would request to please submit your question in Q&A, and we pick it up, and and Salman can pick it up himself, or we can present it to him. So Umar, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahid, and thanks, Salman. It's a subject which was very well needed. I will say most of the first generation who went abroad, they worked very hard, and they were saving the monies, honestly, for their next generation. And as we are hardworking people, and we always think of our kids. And the good thing happened is that our kids, they all went to the good schools, and probably they don't need our money at all. And most of the kids, they will tell to their parents, I mean, you enjoy your money, we don't need your money. So now most of us have sufficient, I will say, the money or capital, which we can invest. And some of us are really investing as Junaid mentioned, some are interested in the real estate, but those are not where you multiply with the factors of hundreds or thousands. And Amazon or Google is an excellent example in that sense. So I think, and we are also have a commitment to our own homeland. So I think from that perspective, your presentation has been very helpful. I mean, that will give us the opportunity to see what are the sectors where the people from here can invest. So can you tell us, since you have been connecting the investors from Silicon Valley to the founder or startup companies in Pakistan, so what is the sector, or what is the split of those sectors who are seeking the funds from US?
Thank you. So Dr. Umar, I would say the sectors, sector-wise, most of the, I think this is sort of like, if I look at all the emerging markets, typically there are waves of, in which funding comes in different sectors. Typically, the first round of funding for most emerging markets, including Pakistan, has been on large consumer-focused sectors like e-commerce, like health tech, like ed tech, I would say logistics, fintech. These are the sectors where I would say bulk of the capital has come. I would say within, if I look at hierarchy, probably the most amount of it has initially come in grocery retail. So, e-commerce, fashion retail, e-commerce, and then players who sort of support in the logistics part of this whole venture. So people who are managing, supplying inventory, managing inventory, automating sales processes for small retailers. They were the ones initially attracted a lot of the capital. So you have examples like Airlift or Bazaar or Tajir. These are the kind of sort of companies which attracted the most amount of capital initially. And you have players such as Kleiner Perkins, for example, from the Bay Area, which invested in, for example, Tajir. Similarly, and I would say that most of the initial bulk of the capital went there. Then you have fintech. So a lot of you would be aware that generally banking is quite inefficient and underpenetrated in Pakistan. So a lot of you have almost, I think, not more than 30% of the entire population which is banked. So most people don't have a bank account because it's not worthwhile for traditional banks to actually serve them, because their operating cost is too high, and the deposits that they get from such clients is not that much. So fintech attracted a lot of capital. A lot of new digital banks have come in, and they attracted a lot of capital from both venture capitalists as well as angel investors early on. I would say that's the second large bucket that we have. The third bucket has been health tech, and within health tech, I would say there are 3-4 subsegments, and maybe that's more interesting for this audience. It includes people focusing on e-pharmacy. So, because as you know, a lot of the pharmaceutical products available in Pakistan are fake or they're out of stock, and that's due to a number of different issues: supply chain issues, inventory issues, lack of stability in the supply chain, so on and so forth. So e-pharmacy is one. So you have examples like Dawai. You have companies like Medicine More, which are trying to solve that e-pharmacy problem. Then there are players who are focused on providing doctors on demand in a way. So online doctors. So you have Sehat Kahani, you have Healthwire, you have you have a number of other similar players which are trying to provide for doctors online. So you have those kind of players. Then you have or basically trying to integrate the entire chain. So they would try to integrate your lab with your doctor, with your medical records and everything. So so that's one ecosystem, and it includes both the B2C and C2C, B2C and B2B, so business to business as well as business to customer kind of models. And then third one is more, I would say, more deep tech. And deep tech, I would say, means players who actually manufacture medical technology, and that is somewhat limited because it requires more capital and it requires more sophisticated founders. And you have companies which are making now ventilators, and there are companies which are making dialysis machines, and I think some of them have presented in your gathering in the past. So these are three, I would say, within the medical larger pharma universe that you have funding going. The fourth one is, to a lesser degree, you have ed tech players, education focused, and again trying to unlock or overcome the inefficiencies in the educational sector in Pakistan by covering different segments of the education sector. So everything from K-12 to high school and onwards, to medical and university entrance exams, to basically CSS exams, so serving different segments of that chain within education. So there are a number of players which are operating. So I would say 80% of the funding would go into these sectors, but then there's a delta of another 20% which has dispersed into lots of other things. I think this is not abnormal for a first wave of funding going into emerging markets, and Pakistan is no exception. But the second wave is coming, and second wave typically then goes into more specific sectors, and you already see some signs of that coming. So it includes more software as a service kind of models, where you have more B2B, business to business kind of models coming in, and so I think that's more, I would say, AI backed solutions for different kind of problems in different sectors. So I would, it's a long-winded way of saying that it's pretty much, I would say, initial wave around 80% within these four sectors, and then 20% in everything else, and then balance is sort of, and it's sort of evolving over time as we going, as the space is becoming mature, more and more mature.
Thank you, Salman. Before I invite another panelist, Mustafa, with his question, I just wanted to ask you that when you mentioned that these pharmacy online companies coming because, or maybe you just mentioned that most of the medicines are fake, and we know that it's true. Do you think that these companies, online companies, are ensuring that the medicines that they are providing are not fake? Is that there also a service or nature? It doesn't matter. They are just online distributors.
Look, personally, I can't vouch for any of these operations myself. What I can tell you is that I personally invested, for example, in one of these companies, so I had the chance to dig a bit more deeper in that venture. So I can't speak for all of them, but typically, if you look at pharmaceutical supplies in Pakistan, the challenge is that you have the big manufacturers of pharma will directly supply the big retailers in pharma, and then for everybody else, if there is a distributor in between, and the distributor will supply all the small retail pharma chains, and they will, or mom and pop shops, and they will also distribute on behalf of all the big or let's say mid-size and small-size pharmaceutical companies. And then there's a wholesale market, which is completely unregulated. And typically what happens is, if you, as you know, like there are very few pharma chains in Pakistan. So you, apart from the exception of maybe something like Surveyed or Fazaldeen, there are very few of them out there. Most of them are mom and pop shops. And their biggest challenge is that they have a very small amount of working capital available. So the capital they have in time, they can't keep a lot of inventory any point in time. So what happens is that typically they would, the pharmaceutical companies or the distributors will deposit maybe 2 to 3 days worth of medicines in the store at the start of the week. And they do that because they don't have capital beyond 3-4 days, maybe 2-3 days of medicines in a week. So what will happen is that the fast moving drugs will move and they go away. As soon as he runs out of that stock, he now has to, because the next delivery is going to be 4 days later, he actually goes to the wholesale market. And over there, he buys directly for the items he has stock out for. When he goes to the wholesale market, obviously, wahan pe you have opportunity for a lot more fake medicines to come through, because it's no longer coming through an official distributor or an official supplier. So, and all of a sudden, you are now buying all of these fake medicines. He may obviously be actively involved in buying fake medicines to improve his margins, but even if he's not, because his channel is such that he's going to this wholesale market, often he will not know even himself whether he's buying fake or not. So, so that's one very practical one problem. The way the big online players are trying to crack this, and this is not the same model which you see in retail, is because as you become bigger and bigger, because you have volumes, the large pharmaceutical companies will start supplying you direct. And if they're not supplying you direct, at least the big distributors, because you are now a significant player or significant consumer of those drugs, they will have a direct relationship with you. If you're a well-funded venture, typically you will get credit as well. And if you have scale, so they will give you credit as well for those medicines. So you don't have to plug in a lot of your capital in inventory. So as you scale up, as you become bigger and bigger, you should by default be able to have more of these direct relationship with the pharmaceutical companies directly and the distributors. So that allows you by at least authenticate the chain at the back end on your side. Front end, obviously you control directly, but the back end in terms of supplies, because you're getting the medicine directly from the pharmaceutical player or their main distributor, you have the authenticity chain at the back end. So that's one thing way they solve it. The other way is, as I mentioned earlier, the working capital issue. So for example, one company we've invested in recently as a syndicate, what they are doing now is they're also offering working capital loans to these mom and pop pharmacy shops. So they have two models: a B2C model, where if you offer a medicine on their platform, they will deliver it to your home. But at the same time, they go to a lot of these mom and pop pharmacy shops and they say, guys, I will supply you the medicines. I also give you 100,000 rupees working capital loan to buy these medicines. You don't have to go to the distributor. And the moment that happens, that guy gets this authentic product all the way from the back end to his shop, because now he has a working capital loan to work with. Now, why he did not have that working capital loan to work with in the past? Because nobody in Pakistan wants to provide working capital loans to SMEs. So none of these shops actually do get working capital loans. Why can the e-commerce player do it? The e-commerce player can do it because they have a POS machine in the pharmacy where they can track the sales of this guy. So if you have a bit of data on how much revenue this guy is generating, you can then start to figure out, okay, his turnover is X. If his turnover is, let's say, 100 rupees, I can maybe supply him 50 rupees at least, knowing that he can repay me. And if he does not repay me, obviously I stop my supplies to him. But this is an ongoing relationship where he keep on getting real-time data on these mom and pop shops. And against that real-time data, he can extend some working capital loans. Because he can extend the working capital loans, he can buy real medicines. So it's one way of cracking the problem. Obviously, I don't think it's going to solve all the problems, but it adds efficiency in this chaos that we have.
Yeah, great. I think this brings into focus the value that these startups and new ecosystem brings with it as a side to it, to dismantle the old cultural barriers and maybe corruption, maybe impurities, and maybe fake medicines. So let me go to Dr. Mustafa Siddiqui. He's He's illustrious professor of neurology in Wake Forest University, a movement disorder neurologist, and co-chair of research committee of APPNA MERIT. Mustafa, you have a question?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Salman, and thank you, Junaid, for organizing it. So my question is, so in the context of what we are trying to do in APPNA MERIT is that we have been trying to bring major research accomplishers and tell us about what they have been doing. One of the ideas which we had in our committee was to develop a research shark tank. And I was really thinking that after hearing your talk, maybe we should partner with you in developing a something like a venture capital shark tank, pretty much on the lines of the real Shark Tank. And we have in our group many big accomplishers in their fields, and maybe we can develop a system where everyone does a 5-minute presentation of their idea, and at your end you have potential investors, and whichever way you want to operationalize it, maybe Junaid and you can combine to lead that initiative, and maybe we can make some good use of our expertise as well as your expertise. So thank you. Do you have any comment on that?
So look, I mean, happy to collaborate with APPNA MERIT on our side. I think what we do, and just to give you context, I think on our side, what we do on a monthly basis is we get about 24 or so startups to pitch, send their proposals to Paklaunch platform, and we have a team of volunteers who basically sift through these pitches, and then we sort of shortlist some of them, and we then spend quite a bit of time discussing and debating their venture, their model, their team further. And then out of that, we sort of shortlist about 3 to 4 startups every month to actually pitch in front of investors. So that's a model we are doing on our side at the moment. Now, within the medical space itself, I think where we probably would say is that we lack specialization or in-depth know-how of different sort of sub-segments within medicine space, right? So while I would understand how services would work in the medical space, I would not know if you, let's say, talk about a device specifically or a certain kind of treatment for a certain kind of disease, whether that makes sense or not, because I just would not have that background. So I think to the extent there are any ventures which can be made commercialized, I think it would make sense for those kind of ventures to have a combo of from people within your network who know that space, and people who come from an investment background like myself and others who can sort of jointly look at some of these pitches and see if it makes sense to put them in front of investors.
So I personally think that there is definitely a lot of potential, especially like when you were discussing, you talked about the whole process of optimization of pharmacy, right? That's basically, you have to go back to school for that. It seems like it, right? I didn't know that. So there is definitely a lot of potential in our group, right? From cardiology, nephrology, to radiology, to neurology, whatever that may be, to not only support you in terms of vetting those ideas, but also become potential investors and become, domain experts with them. Because you don't just provide funding, you provide mentorship, you provide leadership, as you suggested, you become basically at times part of the team. So I think that what Dr. Siddiqui is saying is that there's a significant amount of collaboration potential, especially on digital health products, that we both, can actually, from an APPNA platform and open platform and Paklaunch, can benefit from each other. And it's not just about the dollars, it's also about, creating success pathways.
No, I completely agree with that, and I think that's again, as you're saying, I think certain spaces are very highly specialized, and typically I run away from such spaces because I would not know head from toe, right? So in a sense, if I look at med tech, for example, med tech, if you take up one niche within med tech, you will have domain experts within that niche in med tech, and typically often that's for the same reason. If you look at people who invest in venture capital in med tech, they are very, very specialized in what they do. And often these people will be PhDs in certain technologies or certain spaces, who are also investors in those venture capital funds investing in that space. But these are highly specialized people investing in that space for the same reason. Generalist VC funds typically will not go into deep dive med tech investments because they would just not understand them, frankly speaking. So, and that's number one rule in investments: you don't invest in stuff you don't understand. But that's where I think the collaboration element comes in. So, for example, to the extent there is something which is requires domain expertise, and that domain expertise is available within APPNA MERIT, I think it makes a lot of sense to collaborate on those ideas and those kind of ventures, and see how we can first of all review it properly, and then filter out the best, the wheat from the chaff, and then really focus on the ones which we think have potential, and then sort of provide both the domain expertise and the commercial hat in terms of advice and support, apart from the capital, to those kind of ventures.
Right. So Salman, this I think this brings me to further question, or a little deeper dive into the remaining 20%, when you said that are the domains which are more technical and maybe more need more investment, and that's why they're not explored. For example, you said medical technology, and so other than the expertise, which of course what Junaid mentioned, that we have a wealth of expertise, and if we tap them, they will go. If we provide a platform, they will go. But on their own, a scientist sitting in Arkansas or Michigan or wherever would not know what to do with his idea or what to do with his expertise. But that's the beauty of. But my question is that other than, say, expertise that can be provided, we can find an expert in that domain, and capital. For example, with the collaboration in Silicon Valley, we come up with a capital. What other challenges do you see in, say, for example, opening up a big pharmaceutical structure where we do the R&D and where we do develop API, which is never developed in Pakistan, or reverse engineering, and same thing with the medical device, opening up a bigger structure where you not only do the R&D, but maybe manufacture those devices?
I think the challenge, typically that you face in this space is that they're typically very capital intensive. First of all, they require more capital than otherwise to develop something. Number two, it is the gestation time is quite long. So which means that the results may not be available in next 6 months, 12 months. Results might be coming in 3 years or 5 years. And that's a challenge often the Silicon Valley VC funds also struggle with when looking at anything in medtech, because the gestation time, if you're, for example, developing a new drug, you're developing a new device, a new treatment, it might be a 3 to 5 year kind of venture. And typically the investment horizon is 5 years, which means that they invest in year 1 or 2, they see growth, they do further rounds, and the idea is that by year 5 they exit, they sell, and they may make their money. Here you're looking at a gestation cycle of maybe you invest, you may not have anything to show for 3 years or 5 years, and then you may or may not have an end product at the end of it, right? And if you have an end product, then great. It may or may not work commercially. Again, second challenge. So I think that you need to have a more patient capital for this space, and number two, you need a lot more capital for this space than otherwise, normally speaking. I think that's my concern. I think if you look at
Salman,
pharmaceuticals,
probably I can comment because something I'm doing day in and day out. So what Shahad was alluding to was like, not only we will go to Pakistan just with the capital, and I would like to hear actually the challenges most of the time people face on that front. So please touch on that one afterwards. But we are also willing to go with the idea. Recently launched a model which is very unique. So rather than going there with an idea and then setting up the company and hiring the people, we are to work with the big pharma over there. So which is you have the idea and you have the money, you can kickstart in no time because they have all the infrastructure you will need. So that's the one thing. But we are always, I mean, there are a few things I would like to ask you. A, what are the strengths, for example, of the founders or the companies where you invest? I mean, few strengths you believe are the key factors which entice you to invest. And the second part is, what are the weaknesses which we need to be aware of, or we need to work with them to convert into the strengths?
Sure. Look, I think we need to differentiate a little bit. I think from using large established companies for developing certain businesses or products for you, from funding a very early stage company, because in a way there's slightly different animals. I completely see the value of using a large established partner to develop ideas or products for you, based on certain sort of focus area that you might have, and that completely works. I think and that has it's more of a R&D challenges that you face in that, right? The issue with early stage companies is a bit more tricky in itself, and it's because founders often will be the first time founders. A lot of them would be people who were in the late 20s, early 30s, who have had a little bit of experience, but not a lot of experience in managing large teams. This is the first time they actually are trying to do something like this. So they may not have the requisite skill sets for everything that is required to actually grow the company and develop it and make it something big. So they might be the good founder, they might be the right people to actually for the initial scaling, but may not be the right people for making it big eventually. Skill sets, I think is one thing which I guess you either have them or you don't have them, or you learn along the way. But I think for me the important thing when I look at my investments, I think for me the most important thing is, are the founders smart and committed to what they're trying to do, right? Are they hungry? Do they know what they're doing? And are they smart enough to figure out when they're doing something wrong and they fix it? Which means that they either are willing to learn or willing to listen. So and they learn from their mistakes. So very often early stage companies, they come with a certain idea or business plan, and they often change along the way. They pivot, and they pivot because they're learning from as they go. And I think the motto really is that you basically put out a minimum viable product in the market, not the best product, not the perfect product, a minimum viable product. You put it in the market, see if it can sink or swim. If it sinks, you're doing something wrong, you tweak, you put out the next version of the minimum viable product. You again tweak till you get the right fit, right? So founders who are smart, hardworking, founders who are committed and hungry, they will keep on changing the business model till they get it right. But So you're effectively betting on the founder and or the founding team. I think that's number one. Number two, I think, is the idea itself, because is it addressed to a market which is large and sizable? And the reason is because you might have the greatest idea in the world, but if the market total size is $100 million, you will never become a big company. Does not matter what you do, how good you are. You can become $100 million, you can become 10% of that or 20% of that, but you will never be a large company, So if the market itself is not big enough, if you want to make money, it's not a good idea to back companies which are going after very small niche. So that's the other thing. Number three is the business model that they have. Does it actually allow them to scale up quickly and in a cost efficient way or not? So you might have and we're these days actually hearing a lot more about companies laying off because they're trying to conserve cash and so on and so forth. You might have a $10 billion market, but your growth model is such that you consume a lot of cash for customer acquisition, and it's not sustainable long term. If you want to be profitable, then there's something wrong with your model, because then you need to either change your model or tweak it to find something which works. So I would typically not like to invest in models which I know will only survive as long as funding is available. You need to have models which have the ability to tweak, be cost efficient when they acquire growth. You should not be reliant on buying growth by throwing money at it, right? You can always become the world's top PC maker seller if you're selling PCs for $1, but that's not a sustainable business, right? You need to at least at the very least break even at some point. If not today, maybe there needs to be paths to profitability at some point. So I think the business model and how you grow and how cost efficient you are in your growth is important. Something which people have not been focusing, I think, enough on in the last 2 years, because a lot of capital was available. So I mean, these would be like the top three things for me, really.
Salman, I think we are getting over time, but if you are okay and some of the audience are okay, we may get 5 or 10 minutes more. I have a question. My question basically was towards the climate, business climate and political climate of Pakistan. Okay, I'm talking about those niche industries, say pharma industry or medical device industry.
Yeah.
You got the ideas, you got the scientist, right scientist, and you got the team, and you got the money. But can you tell or forecast, in your experience, how the economic and social and political climate of Pakistan will play into this venture if somebody would to go that route?
Look, I think if I had a crystal ball, I mean, I would be a rich man. But I think really depends on what you're trying to do, right? So at the end of the day, I'm a bit contrarian about the macro story impacting. I mean, the macro story obviously has impact on how ventures do in the economy, because they're part of the economic ecosystem, right? At the end of the day, they are impacted by government changes, they are impacted by instability, they are impacted by capital or lack of capital availability, and general law and order situation. These all things, they are impacted by that. And the customer demand goes up and down based on how the economy is doing. All those factors are relevant. Having said that, it depends on really what you're trying to do. So let me give you an example. Like if I was looking at this company, I had a fundraiser last week. I arranged one for a startup, which was essentially focused, was based out of Pakistan, but was essentially offering GRE, GMAT, and TOEFL examination prep. And it was targeting a global market. And the biggest market for these obviously is the United States. And it was serving the United States out of Pakistan. 99% of its customers were North American. They were earning in dollars. Does the economic situation in Pakistan impact them? Not really. I mean, as long as the electricity is coming, the internet is working, and people can come to work they're fine. I looked at a venture some time back which was doing audiobooks in all fields, and again, global market. Essentially, working for companies like Audible, Amazon Audible, for example, and others who were just producing audiobooks for university books, literature, history, whatever. And they had a team which was global. They were operational based out of Lahore, but they were doing an audiobooks business, right? And because the market is global, does not matter as much what is happening locally or domestically in Pakistan. The other flip side of the argument, if you look at certain companies, for example, even if Pakistan itself, the economy is not doing that great, there is instability, because there's so much inefficiency in in literally every sector of the economy, even if the pie itself is not growing, if you can remove part of that inefficiency in the chain, there is a lot of unmet demand today where a startup can grow quite a lot very fast. So irrespective of whether GDP is growing at 5% or 10%, if someone can crack education or education technology properly, or someone can crack health tech in Pakistan properly, I personally think they will go irrespective whether Pakistan is growing or not, just because you have at the end of the day 220 million people, out of which 65% are under the age of 35. So that's at the end of the day just pure demographic demand. And if you can serve it in a good way, there will be bumps. In good years you will grow faster, in bad years you will not grow as fast. But just because the inefficiency is so large in the different sectors of the economy, you can still do very, very well. But yes, there are other sectors which are impacted by government policies more directly, and I think one should be wary of them. And I think automotive policy, for example, is impacted by what government decides one day, right? If you want to do electric vehicles, government might change its policy. It allows for imports to happen. All of a sudden, you're flooded by Chinese imports. You're dead. Next day, they say no, only domestic production will be allowed. All of a sudden, you're king, and within 3 years, you become a very large electric vehicle manufacturer in Pakistan. So I would say it's not a straight answer from that perspective.
Yes, what I'm guessing is that if you have a good idea and a good path, then not worry so much about, although obviously that impacts, but still you in private sector you have some kind of insulation with the demand of the market. But are you satisfied with how the legal structure and infrastructure around startups have developed in Pakistan? Is it, comparing it to the other countries, is it coming closer or to the ecosystem, the whole infrastructure of the ecosystem?
That's a great question. Look, I mean, it's a work in progress. I mean, Pakistan has all kinds of laws. Often the problem is they're not really implemented properly, or they implemented far too late. And I think that's a challenge for the legal system overall. I think the way a lot of people try to work around that is they do investments in holdcos which are based out of Delaware or Singapore. So you have your investment going into an entity which owns the assets in Pakistan or operations in Pakistan. So there's a foreign holdco and a domestic opco, and this foreign holdco has all the money, and this entity owns this operations company in Pakistan. So which means that and the shareholding is held at this level. So for all practical purposes, if there is a dispute, you can take the guy to court in Delaware, or the company to court in Delaware, for example, or Singapore, versus trying to find justice in Lahore or Islamabad. So that's one way of working around it. The other thing is that I think the State Bank, at least in the last 3.5 years under Dr. Bakr, I think has allowed for quite a lot of more flexibility in terms of how do you actually vest equity, how do you actually provide incentive, because startups often would actually provide sweat equity to some of their I would say early employees, founders, They would also actually allow for safe structures, convertible structures, which State Bank historically was not very comfortable with. I think they have become a lot more comfortable with. If you look at exit solutions, so the Pakistan Stock Exchange has now has a small cap gem board, which allows for small companies to list, which was not there in the past. So if you want to exit, you can potentially list a much smaller company that you could have done 5 years ago. So some of the regulations, I would say, some of the players in the ecosystem recognize the value and the what these growth in this space can bring. And I think it has become easier and more standardized in Pakistan over the last 3.5 years, especially versus before, in terms of investing, in terms of the founders understanding what you're doing, in terms of the investors understanding what they're doing, and what works and what does not work than, let's say, before. So it is getting better. Now the proof is in the pudding. Often you find out the things when things go south, and things have become tougher in recent past with the global meltdown in the tech sector. So some companies will go under, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the local rules and local regulations interact with the agreements which have been reached by foreign investors with some of these companies which are under stress. But one thing I would tell you, and this is not unique to startup investing in Pakistan or in any, I mean, it's just general rule that I have from any investing, is that the moment you have to take out your legal agreement to protect your rights, you've already lost. And the reason is because in any company that you have invested in, if you are going into litigation with them at some point to protect your rights, you've made a bad deal with the wrong guys, and you are actually damaging your own interest by going into litigation with an entity you have invested in. So I think for me, rules are nice, laws are nice, they're useful, they support the growth of the ecosystem. But I think if you end up trying to fight your rights in courts, you probably have a dead investment already, irrespective of whether the laws work or not.
Actually, I would like to add a few things. So medical industry in general, when you are designing a product, sometimes you're not designing it for the consumer. You're actually designing it for the regulators. Just quite simply, I have 2 artificial intelligence models that are completely ready with 98% sensitivity and specificity. I have to redo the study to meet FDA regulations. So one of the things, unfortunately, with healthcare industry in particular, is the heavy regulation environment that actually comes through. I mean, the model can be anywhere, which brings us to the second point in Pakistan, which you were discussing, the heavily dysregulated or unregulated environment. In Pakistan, I considered it as a massive opportunity rather than actually a problem. Because what happens is that for me to actually get ahead in a global market, believe it or not, Pakistan market becomes an essential stepping stone and a key area for ground testing, real world testing, etc. And not unethical testing. I mean, we have done it because half of my products at least are digital, so it doesn't matter. But even though they're not, I think it is essentially an extremely fertile ground in which Pakistan companies can operate much faster and better as compared to, let's say, a company in US. So again, there are pros and cons to everything as we discuss. There's always regulation in finance and healthcare, which is extremely hard to overcome at some points in time. But at the end of the day, I feel like the environment in Pakistan is actually opportunistic. As far as the problems that are continuing, internet access, electricity, those are issues that are going on. And I think people have started to work around them faster and faster, at least when my development team, I'm interacting with them, and they're getting better at it as we move along.
I completely agree with what Junaid is saying. And I think, look, I mean, lack of regulation or low regulation means that you can actually do some very interesting things which you can't do in developed markets. So for example, some of the medtech companies or healthcare companies that I looked at, they are able to collect so much data from so many things because, for example, data privacy as the area is not that developed, but because they have so much data, they are able to train their algorithms or from AI, and on so much more data across so many more data points, and that yields a lot of interesting results, right? And it's one of the reasons, for example, Chinese surveillance technology or Chinese AI technology is, or even autonomous driving is often better than the US, because US has a lot more restrictions on data sharing than in China. And so that's one. And yeah, and again, look, I mean, if you're a $1 billion company, yes, economic situations and everything else impacts you a lot more. If you're a $1 million company, you have $1 billion to go before it starts impacting you.
Right. If there are no other questions, I think we are well over time. I would like to thank the panelists and in particular, obviously, our speaker for a great talk. But in particular, I always thank our attendees who come loyally, and I'm sure they're learning. I hope they're learning, and because of their presence, we have such a good series of webinar every Saturday. So please keep coming and look for our in-person symposium in New Jersey on, I think it's 16th of July, would be Saturday. 16th of July at 1 o'clock in New Jersey, which is Atlantic City, New Jersey, in the APPNA Summer Convention. APPNA MERIT is collaborating with Open Global to have this seminar on innovation in healthcare in Pakistan. So if you're around, if you can come in person, we'll see you there. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for your time, and great speaking with you guys.